You can bury a man. But you can't bury an idea. In 2011, they bombed Libya in the name of freedom. Gaddafi was dragged through the dirt, and the world clapped. The West promised democracy. Instead, they left behind a broken country bleeding from 1,000 cuts, militias, foreign puppets, betrayal. And they thought it was over. But now, a ghost rises. Not from the past, but from the silence that followed. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son they called a fugitive, a criminal, a remnant of tyranny, has returned. Not with fanfare. Not with an army. But with something far more dangerous, timing. He steps back into a Libya that is not free, but exhausted. Not democratic, but fragmented. And in that vacuum, his name does not provoke rage. It sparks something else. Curiosity. Memory. And maybe, a dangerous hope. Libya was destroyed in the name of democracy. But after a decade of chaos, the people want something else. Stability. Dignity. And maybe, a Gaddafi. If this is the truth they don't want you to hear, leave a like. In 2021, after nearly a decade in silence and captivity, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi shocked the world by announcing his candidacy for president. The elections were planned for December 24, a symbolic day for a new Libya. Though the vote never took place, his comeback lit a fire. Since then, he has reappeared across southern Libya. Holding discreet meetings with tribal elders, rebuilding old alliances, and speaking not of revenge, but of reconciliation. Yet, he's still a wanted man. The International Criminal Court lists him as a war criminal. Western leaders whisper threats. But none of that has stopped the momentum. Because in today's Libya, legality is weak, but nostalgia is strong. And Saif knows it. To understand why Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's name stirs not just controversy but hope, you have to look at what Libya became after his father fell. It wasn't just the collapse of a regime. It was the erasure of a system, for better or worse, that had held the nation together. After 2011, Libya didn't transition. It imploded. Ministries vanished. Armed militias filled the vacuum. Every city became a turf. Every road a checkpoint. Every institution a battleground. The national army? Fragmented. The economy? Devastated. Oil-rich Libya became an open-air casino for smugglers, mercenaries, and foreign profiteers. And while Western leaders delivered speeches about progress, Libyan hospitals ran out of medicine. Schools shut their doors. Blackouts swallowed entire neighborhoods. Freedom came, but with no food, no fuel, and no future. The promises of democracy had turned to ash. And what grew in their place wasn't liberty, but lawlessness. For many Libyans, especially those too young to remember the green era, chaos is all they've ever known. But for those who do remember, the contrast is unbearable. They remember a time when salaries were paid on time. Bread cost pennies, fuel was abundant, and the streets were safe. Of course, there was fear under Gaddafi. But there was also order. And for a people battered by unpredictability, even fear with structure begins to feel safer than freedom without direction. It's not nostalgia for dictatorship. It's trauma from democracy gone wrong. And that's what makes Saif's return so potent. Because he's not promising a revolution, he's offering familiarity. A return to structure. A leader whose name, whatever its baggage, at least means something. And in a land where meaning has become rare. That counts. He's tapping into a vacuum that elections failed to fill, where legitimacy isn't defined by institutions, but by memory. And memory, in Libya, is political currency. The country has been caught in a cycle of betrayal. Interim governments rise, make deals with foreign backers, and fall. Militias take over towns, pledge loyalty, then turn on their own. People vote, or try to, only to see elections cancelled, postponed, or ignored. And so, the average Libyan has stopped asking for change. Now, they ask for survival. Predictability. Continuity. They don't dream of progress, they pray for peace. That's the soil Saif is planting himself in. Not as a savior, not even as a reformer, but as a name the country hasn't entirely forgotten how to trust. Because in the wreckage of a failed state, memory becomes resistance. He knows this. That's why his message isn't about the past. It's about restoring what the past once promised, stability. He doesn't need to win everyone. He only needs to remind enough people that there was once a time when Libya functioned. And maybe, just maybe, it could again. And here's the deeper truth, when you've been betrayed by every promise. Sometimes the devil you know feels like your only hope. Bell, if you believe this isn't coincidence, but design, let me know in the comments. Still, this moment isn't just emotional. It's deeply political. Because for over a decade, Libya hasn't been ruled, it's been administered. By proxy. By outsiders. By factions too weak to govern, but strong enough to obstruct. Foreign governments have played chess with Libyan lives, financing warlords, arming militias, cutting deals for oil access. Every peace summit has been theater. Every ceasefire a lie. And the people? They're spectators in their own country. So when Saif reappears, not through foreign embassies, but through tribal councils, not on international news, but in village gatherings, it hits differently. It signals something bold, that Libya might be done asking for permission. That maybe, just maybe, a leader doesn't have to come from abroad, or be blessed by the UN, or checked off by Washington. Maybe legitimacy can come from below. From memory. From exhaustion turned into consensus. Saif isn't building a campaign, he's building an argument. That Libya belongs to Libyans. That leadership is not a brand for foreign consumption, but a pact between those who stayed and those who suffered. Of course, critics say he's just exploiting nostalgia. But they forget, nostalgia is not weakness. It's memory weaponized. And in Libya, memory might be all that's left to fight with. Because when people lose everything, wealth, power, dreams, they begin to remember what mattered most, order. Pride, sovereignty. Even if it comes wrapped in an old name. So as Libya stands at yet another crossroads, torn between a haunted past and a hijacked present, Saif doesn't promise redemption. He offers rhythm. And after years of being dictated to, invaded, broken apart, rhythm might be the most revolutionary thing of all. Saif al-Islam's return isn't just a story of one man against the world. It's a battle between networks. Between memory and militia. Between tribal loyalty and foreign leverage. And behind the quiet reappearance lies a storm of calculations. Let's start inside Libya. The first force to understand is the tribes, the country's original power map, long before constitutions or ballots. Under Gaddafi, tribal balance was everything. He ruled not with parties, but with pacts. With rewards, with fear, with favor. And Saif is returning to that blueprint, but with a twist. He's not threatening. He's listening. Sitting on carpets, drinking tea under tents, showing scars not just on his face, but in his silence. It's not dominance. It's familiarity. Tribes like the Warfala, the Magara, the Kadhadfa, all carry memories of the Green Era. And many of their elders remember not just the privileges they lost, but the humiliation they endured after 2011. Saif offers them something no general or Western envoy ever did, dignity. Not money. Not power. Dignity. And in tribal politics, that's currency you can't counterfeit. Then there's the military class, fractured. Frustrated, nostalgic. The former officers of Gaddafi's army. Some joined Haftar. Others faded into civilian life. But they remember structure. Command. National unity. Many watched post-2011 Libya descend into warlordism and felt disgust, not defeat. They waited. They watched. And now, they see a familiar figure walking toward the fire again. Some follow out of loyalty. Others out of exhaustion. But what about the man who already holds military power? General Khalifa Haftar. Based in the east, backed by foreign sponsors, Haftar once saw himself as Libya's only strongman. He controlled oil terminals, airbases, and a large chunk of territory. His image, all medals and posturing, was the textbook authoritarian. But something broke in that image. His offensive on Tripoli in 2019 failed. His coalition fractured. And his legitimacy began to fade. Haftar once dismissed Saif as naive, a relic. But now, Saif commands something Haftar never could, emotional resonance. Not just firepower, but forgiveness. And in a war-fatigued country, that counts. Still, Haftar isn't gone. His forces remain armed, and his foreign backers, particularly from the Gulf and Egypt, are not ready to relinquish their influence. Which brings us to the real chessboard, international actors. Start with the ICC. On paper, Saif is a wanted man. The 2011 charges, crimes against humanity, still hang over him. The Hague has not withdrawn its warrant. Legally, he should be in a cell. Not a campaign. But Libya has no unified judiciary. No functioning state. No mechanism to arrest him, especially when half the country welcomes him. To many Libyans, the ICC is not justice. It's hypocrisy. They ask, where was the ICC when NATO bombed civilians? When militias sold migrants as slaves? When warlords tortured dissidents? So when the West points to rule of law, many respond, whose law? Whose justice? Then come the Western powers themselves. Europe, which once cheered Gaddafi's fall, now watches uneasily. Because if Saif returns, and succeeds, the consequences could be seismic. A Libya not aligned with NATO, not begging for EU funds, not funneling migrants across the Mediterranean. That's a nightmare for Brussels. And if Saif revives his father's Pan-African agenda, gold-backed currency, African unity, rejection of IMF dependency, it's more than symbolic. It's disruptive. Europe's influence in North Africa, already shaken by Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, could crumble. A united Libya under Gaddafi's heir could anchor a rising Sahelian coalition. And they know it. That's why media operations have already begun. Quiet. Strategic. Western outlets questioning Saif's legitimacy. Whisper campaigns framing his return as a threat to peace. Reports designed not to inform, but to isolate. Yet, for every article published abroad, a dozen tribal meetings happen in Libya. Untelevised. Unrecorded. But real. And then there's Russia. Never far from Libya's conflict. Wagner forces once operated under Haftar. Now, Moscow is recalibrating. Watching. Waiting. Saif, after all, was never a puppet of the West. And in a world rebalancing toward multipolarity, that makes him interesting. Same with Turkey, deeply involved in Tripoli. Their alliance with the government of national unity is fragile. If Saif gains traction, Ankara will have to rethink its bets. So Saif isn't just fighting for Libya. He's walking through a minefield of competing agendas, internal, regional, global. And yet, his strategy isn't force. It's persistence. Quiet visits. Consistent messaging. One tribe at a time. One town at a time. Rebuilding not a campaign, but a network. And what makes it powerful is this. It's not funded by billion-dollar NGOs. It's not produced by think tanks. It's not marketed for Western approval. It's Libyan. Tribal. Oral. Real. Saif's comeback isn't a press conference. It's a whisper turned into momentum. Still, the opposition is vast. The militias that profit from chaos won't lay down their arms. The politicians backed by foreign powers won't step aside. And the foreign players, they've crushed comebacks before. They have tools, sanctions, disinformation, covert operations. But Saif's team is betting on something else, that Libya's fatigue is now stronger than its fear. That dignity, not ideology, will decide the future. And that no amount of foreign resistance can stop a people ready to reclaim their story, no matter whose son is telling it. Saif al-Islam's return is not just shaking Libya. It's sending ripples across an entire continent. Because this comeback isn't just local. It's symbolic. It fits into a larger pattern, one that has leaders in Paris, Brussels, and Washington wide awake at night. Across Africa, a quiet storm is rising. From Mali to Niger, from Burkina Faso to Chad, governments once aligned with the West are walking away, tearing up military agreements. Kicking out French troops, rejecting IMF dictates, and declaring, Africa first. It's not chaos. It's correction. And in that storm, Saif al-Islam is positioning himself not as a relic of the past, but as part of a new vanguard. He's speaking in a language few politicians dare to use: sovereignty without apology, African unity without permission, development without debt. It's a message echoing through the same corridors once haunted by his father's vision. Because Muammar Gaddafi, for all his flaws, wasn't just a dictator. He was a financier of African universities. A builder of pan-continental infrastructure. The man who proposed a gold-backed dinar to challenge the dollar. The man who wanted one African military, one African bank, one African passport. They killed him for it. But the dream never died. And now, his son is picking up the pieces. Not through speeches at the UN. But through campfire conversations with tribal elders. Through symbolic alliances with the Sahel. Through a strategy that's slower, deeper, more African. And make no mistake, the Sahel is watching. So is West Africa. So is the African Union. Because if Libya stabilizes under a Gaddafi again, this time on African terms, it could redraw the entire geopolitical map of the continent. Imagine this, a corridor of anti-Western, Pan-Africanist states stretching from Tripoli to Bamako to Niamey to Ouagadougou. Economically integrated. Militarily aligned. Diplomatically defiant. A North Sahel axis. With Libya, rich in oil, gas, and water, as its northern anchor. That's not just regional alignment. That's continental momentum. And to the West, it's terrifying. Because they know the consequences. They know that if Libya reopens its oil taps outside IMF control, it sets a precedent. That if Libya joins BRICS or strengthens its ties with Russia, China, or even Turkey, it weakens the dollar's grip. That if Libya revives the gold dinar, and other nations follow, the financial architecture of neo-colonialism starts to crack. This is no longer about Saif al-Islam as a man. It's about Saif al-Islam as a signal. A signal that the West's monopoly over African futures is ending. And that's why the resistance to his rise won't be limited to Libya. We're already seeing media narratives shifting. Western outlets framing him as dangerous, divisive, or destabilizing. Human rights organizations, often silent during NATO bombings, suddenly rediscovering Libya in their headlines. We'll likely see sanctions, disinformation campaigns, even covert attempts to fracture his tribal alliances. Because the return of a Gaddafi is not just an internal matter. It threatens the entire logic of Western control in Africa: destabilize, divide, dominate. But now, that logic is being reversed. Africa is learning to say, destabilize us, and we'll unite. Divide us, and we'll resist. Dominate us, and we'll build new orders. And here's the part they never planned for: the people. The street vendors in Tripoli. The teachers in Timbuktu. The soldiers in Niamey. The elders in Fayil-Arjo. They're talking to each other, not through embassies, but through WhatsApp, through tribal channels, through underground networks of solidarity. They're not waiting for presidents to make statements. They're building consensus from the bottom up. Saif's rise fits into that rhythm. Not forced. Not artificial. Organic. A rhythm that says, we remember who built the roads. Who paid for our schools. Who defended Africa at global forums. And we also remember who bombed our cities. Who armed our enemies. Who told us freedom came from 30,000 feet in the air. Bell, if you believe this momentum goes beyond borders, drop a comment. Let them know Africa sees through the lie. Because this is no longer a Libya story. It's an Africa story. And the question is no longer, can Saif lead Libya? The question is, if Libya rises again, who else rises with it? Already, we're seeing signs. Mali is rebuilding regional alliances outside of ECOWAS. Burkina Faso is creating civilian infrastructure with military governance. Niger is setting its own security agenda. All of them echoing one line, we don't need permission to govern ourselves. If Saif succeeds, the message amplifies. It says to every African leader, you can stand up. You can chart a path that's independent. And if the West tries to punish you, you won't stand alone. This is why the stakes are so high. Because the West isn't just afraid of Saif al-Islam. They're afraid of the idea he represents. That Africa can fall. Can bleed. Can be betrayed. And still, can rise. On its own terms. Here's the twist no one wants to say aloud, but everyone close to the fire suspects, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi might not be acting alone. What if this isn't just the return of one man? What if it's the rise of an entire network, one rooted not in Tripoli or Paris, but in Niamey, Bamako, and Ouagadougou? Sources close to Sahelian military circles speak of quiet coordination. Unofficial envoys. Unmarked convoys crossing desert borders. Saif may not carry a government title, but his name still opens doors. And some of those doors are now inside the AES alliance. It makes strategic sense. The alliance of Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, has broken from the Francophone chain. They've expelled foreign bases, challenged ECOWAS, and forged a doctrine of self-determination. But they lack something: northern reach, coastal leverage, financial heft. Libya, under a friendly regime, could offer all three. In return, Saif would gain what no tribal alliance could offer him alone: regional legitimacy, military protection, strategic depth. Imagine the symbolism. The son of Gaddafi, once caged and condemned, now backed by the very countries that inherited his father's Pan-African dream. A Gaddafi-AES alliance wouldn't just be historic. It would be revolutionary. It would mean that the fight for African sovereignty has a northern front again. It would mean that Europe's border policies, oil routes, and defense lines could be redrawn overnight. And it would mean that for the first time in decades, Africa is coordinating, not reacting. Now look closer. Saif's speeches are filled with coded language, echoes of AES rhetoric. Africa must defend its soul. Security begins where dignity is restored. No external solutions for internal wounds. Even his avoidance of foreign capitals mimics the AES playbook: no photo ops, no begging. Just power, negotiated under the sun, not behind flags. Some dismiss this theory as wishful thinking. But wishful thinking doesn't explain the silence. The precision. The timing. Libya is fragile. But Saif isn't rushing. He's waiting, not for permission, but for alignment. And if that alignment is coming from the Sahel, then this isn't a comeback. It's a continental maneuver, long in the making. Quiet in its build-up. Explosive in its implication. Because if Saif's campaign is not just tribal, not just national, but continental in nature, then the world is not facing a new Libya. It's facing the reincarnation of a vision it thought it killed in 2011. Across the ruins of Sirte, a breeze lifts dust from forgotten streets. In the quiet corners of Fezzan, old songs echo, half memory, half prayer. A generation that grew up in the shadows now watches a familiar silhouette move across the landscape, not as a savior, but as a reminder. That dignity, once broken, can be rebuilt. That sovereignty, once stolen, can be reclaimed. And that a continent, once silenced, can still find its voice. This isn't about rewriting the past. It's about finishing a chapter that was interrupted, not by failure, but by force. What happens next will not be decided in parliaments or embassies. It will be decided in whispers. In choices, in whether a people still believe in themselves after everything they've lost. Because maybe, just maybe, Saif al-Islam isn't Libya's second chance. Maybe he's Africa's memory, refusing to die. Bell, if you believe the truth shouldn't be buried, like, comment, and subscribe. Not for me. For the ones who were never allowed to speak.